Our next Firestarter conversation features Taoiseach Micheál Martin, the Prime Minister of Ireland, and Stephanie Flanders, head of Bloomberg Economics.
Taoiseach, thank you so much for joining us here for the New Economy Forum. This part of the proceedings is focused on trade, and I guess we'd have to say you're one of the great pieces of unfinished trade business in the world is sitting right on your doorstep. Are you confident that there is going to be a deal between the EU and the UK before their transition arrangements run out at the end of the year?
I would still hope there will be a comprehensive trade deal, but it will be challenging. And the three items that have been there now for quite some time, the three issues of a level playing field in terms of access to the single market in Europe, with the UK agreeing to adhere to that level playing pitch, that's proving problematic. My understanding is, my sense is if that got sorted, the area of a dispute resolution mechanism would get sorted then in terms of how does one arbitrate as to the behaviour of each party to the agreement. Thirdly, the fisheries is proving very difficult as well. A lot of progress has been made on other issues. My sense of if there's a political will in the United Kingdom to get a Brexit deal done, then it will happen. I think the European Union want a deal. Of that I'm clear. Not at the past, but it's our view, and it's Ireland's view as a member state, that it is in the interest of our citizens and the respective economies to get a deal that makes sense. And no deal would be very damaging to our respective economies. Logic dictates we should do everything we possibly can to get a deal. It's a responsible thing as politicians to do on behalf of the citizens that we represent.
But we now have an incoming US president who's made very clear his views on the Good Friday Agreement and the importance of there not being a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. Do you think that changes the calculus? Do you think that makes it more likely that Boris Johnson would compromise with the EU?
I think it's helped. I spoke to Joe Biden during the week. Very warm, clearly very proud of his Irish heritage, and makes no secret of that. And we're looking forward to his presidency, to be frank, from that perspective. But I think the more broader issue is the prospects of a Biden presidency being more multilateral in its thrust and its impulse. That was clear from my conversation with the president-elect that he was going to engage with Europe. Now that's probably more significant in terms of the impact on the UK's response, because it seems to me that the United Kingdom values its relationship with the United States and vice versa. I think President Biden-elect would too. And so therefore, I think the US, the new presidency, would prefer a deal between Europe and the UK. I think the UK is conscious of that. And the president-elect is very committed to climate change. I think Boris Johnson would like him in Glasgow, for example, for the COP. So I can see an alignment of interests here, sparked by the president's commitment to multilateralism and to resetting, if you like, the sets of relationships between the US and Europe that might be better, or might enhance the prospects of a deal.
But there has been, you've said in the past that both sides have to compromise in order to reach agreement on those three things. But there has been some question about whether the European Union feels like it now has to compromise, given this change of emphasis from the US. If Boris Johnson now feels more pressure from the US, and maybe that trade deal with the US being in doubt without a deal, does Europe need to compromise at all?
Well, look, I think I wouldn't overstate that. I think Europe wants a deal. And I think also it's in our interest that there would be a comprehensive trading deal between the UK and the European Union. I think the UK is getting a big prize in terms of having access to the European single market. And I think it's legitimate for Europe to say, look, there has to be basic rules of the game, so to speak, in terms of access to the market that apply to everybody who has access to the market. But I think European negotiators, and Michel Barnier is a very practical guy. He is committed to a deal because in his last presentation to the European Council, he identified peace in Ireland as important. He also identified the importance of a deal in the geopolitical context, how the world is emerging, and he feels it's important that Europe and Britain would reach accommodation. The UK is an important and very strong partner a neighbour of with the European Union. It makes sense all round, economic sense. It also makes security sense. It makes we have common values in terms of democracy, freedom of speech in a world that's becoming more authoritarian. So, but I do. Yes, the sense is politically in London. Will the calculation be made? Will the decision be made in London to sort of go for it and say, let's get a deal done? And I think some of us think that's an issue that yet has to be determined.
And are you at all encouraged by some of the personnel changes we've seen at Number 10? Without going, it shouldn't be about personalities, it should be about policies, but we know there are some personalities that have been very important to Boris Johnson's government and were very relaxed about a new deal. If they have gone or are about to go, do you think that is encouraging from your perspective?
I think I'm not clear on that. I mean, I think there's been a lot of negotiations, a lot of engagement. I think trust has built up between both parties, actually, who are negotiating, both negotiating teams. I think that's more important than the personalities behind the scenes in Downing Street. My sense is that there has been an intensification of the talks over the last 3 weeks. So both sides know each other a bit better and know the issues, know where the landing zones are around an agreement. My sense, having met Boris Johnson, having talked to him, that my sense is deep down, his gut instinct is that he would see the sense of a deal, and it would, politically, it would make sense that UK would arrive at a deal with the European Union, because the dislocation and the disruption in the context of a no deal would be very, very severe and would be, I suspect, politically damaging all around.
Do you think the British have made enough preparation for that kind of disruption on the border itself?
In terms of, I don't think, in terms of the UK itself, it's questionable whether enough preparation has been made. We're preparing very significantly here in Ireland, and we would be the first to admit that there will be challenges even in a normal Brexit. In other words, that it's not a no deal, but even with a trade deal, there will be enormously increased bureaucracy, for example, declarations, and we're at pains to say to businesses and companies, look, you better get ready here. And I sense that people will get a shock one way or the other around the 1st of January. No, I think it would be much, much worse, obviously, with tariffs and quotas and all of that. And a no deal situation would be, I think, horrendous, and would create significant uncertainty and economic shock that we could do without, because we've had a big economic shock because of COVID-19. The last thing we need is a second one from a no-deal Brexit. So I don't think the UK economy is prepared, or the various sectors are. I think in the Irish economy, we've done everything we possibly can to prepare people, but nonetheless, we still anticipate a disruption at the beginning of January. And on the north,
we should broaden it out a bit. I mean, you say itself, it's going to be a shock when we, even if you had a deal, it's a big change from what we had before, and the deal itself is likely to be quite thin compared to what might have been expected. If we're thinking about global cooperation and inspiring more negotiation on trade globally, I mean, are there any positive lessons from this negotiation for the rest of the world, or are they all negative?
I think the important lesson is don't engage in any sort of knee-jerk reactions to anything, and don't start announcing things or doing things without adequate preparation in advance. I mean, these are very, very weighty issues. They're complex. They have a lot of unintended consequences, and they affect people's lives and livelihoods fairly significantly, as we know. What I would hope with the election of President Biden as well is that we would move to a more open trading perspective again. There was a sense in the context of COVID-19, one gets a sense of a growing protectionism that was happening even prior to COVID. As a small open economy, Ireland is very much on the side of open free trade, and I think we're all perplexed at times as to why the UK would decide to leave one of the largest trading blocs in the world, which has brought about significant economic advancement for all of our economies in Europe, a single market that Margaret Thatcher would have advocated for in her time. So I think there are lessons to be learned in terms of the basic principles that really power an economy. And I think we need to be very conscious of that and reverse any move towards protectionism and move towards an open trading environment.
You said you're expecting a very different approach from President Biden. There had been tit-for-tat tariffs between the US and the EU. Under President Trump, we had the EU tariffs coming in only very recently. As far as you're concerned, are you expecting the first move to come from the US in terms of trying to ease tensions?
Well, I think not necessarily from the US alone. I mean, Europe has to play its part too. And to be fair, there were moves under the previous presidency, President Trump and so on, and his team were moving to try and relax, albeit very slowly, to get some accommodation. But that said, I think both Europe and the US under President-elect Biden will be anxious to engage and to try and dial down the temperature and to reach some accommodation on trade issues. As opposed to a major trade agreement, I think we've been there before. Such a very large, comprehensive agreement is difficult to attain. So I think what you might see is a bit more bite-sized approach to aspects of the trading relationship, and to see, can we sector by sector or in particular areas get a greater engagement and a more constructive engagement.
You talked about the COVID recession. Obviously, we've had a second wave of COVID coming across Europe in the last couple of months. Our own high-frequency indicators of the economy show that is causing a double dip in many economies in terms of activity. How hopeful are you that we can have a faster recovery this time around, and maybe even still see that V-shaped recovery that people have talked about?
I think the success or otherwise of vaccines is going to be a very important story for 2021. And from the Irish perspective, we moved early on the second wave, so we're, I think, the second lowest incidence in Europe now. We're doing very well in terms of a downward trajectory of cases, downward numbers in hospital and ICUs. So somewhere at the end of this month, we'll move out of what we call level 5, which is the highest level of restrictions. It's a lockdown, but not as severe as the first lockdown. Our schools have stayed open, construction has stayed open. Nonetheless, it has been a severe hit on our economy, particularly our domestic economy. Our foreign direct investment side of it is doing very well. We're very strong in life sciences, as you know, and technology. They're performing well. On the first lockdown in the March-April period, construction and those areas took a big hit. So we expect, I think in the early part of 2021, depending on the efficacy of vaccines as they emerge, I think by the middle of 2021, it could be better than we might have anticipated. But I think we're learning a lot more about the virus. That will inform how we exit this level 5 of restrictions and how long we can protect livelihoods as well as lives. And that's important, and to get people back working again in certain sectors. Travel, tourism, aviation, hospitality. Those are the sectors that have been hardest hit. We believe other sectors can come back much more strongly, more quickly.
Taoiseach Micheál Martin, thank you very much.
You're very welcome indeed.